Hi, today let's talk about comparison. Comparison is a very useful technique in data storytelling. By using comparison, you can create the context for your audience to understand the data better. By using comparison, you can also identify the patterns and trends in your data. Lastly, using comparison can support your argument about what are the big differences, why do you focus on some specific points. So today let's look at 5 different ways to create a comparison in your data story. Let's go. The first approach to create a comparison is using transform. Transform basically help us to create a comparison view using a baseline. Let's look at a data set about the unique visit for each week to our Fina app. Fina is a financial app, by the way, we support. So by loading this data, we can see there's like week by week unique visits per week. I'd rather choose a bar chart so we can have independent view for each week clearly. Heading to the transform sections, we can see that we can choose a baseline. In this case, I want to choose average value as a baseline, which means for every week, now it automatically created the delta, the difference, compared to the average value, the mean value. I also wanted to display the value. As you can see now, it actually displays the delta now. So by turning on the percentage value, it automatically transforms the delta, the difference, like see how much increase and how much decrease by comparing the baseline. It's very clear. Approach to create comparison is to use pivot. A lot of people are familiar with pivot table on Excel. It's basically help us to looking into the data from one dimension by slicing another dimension. Sometimes we say it in that way, but most of the time we just say pivot by some dimensions. Let's look at this data set. This data set records the scores for the student. For each of them, they have the group they belong to, which is the A group, Group A, Group B, and Group C. And the second dimension is the gender. In this case, we only have male and female. So when we have 2 dimensions on columns, you can see there's a pivot options there. By default, there's nonsense pivot, so they combine each other as a new key. But by pivot, one dimensions, we can look into another pivot, another dimensions in each category or each group. In this case, we have 3 different groups, A, B, and C. And inside each group, the other dimensions get pivoted, like male and female's comparison. This gives us categorized comparison view very easily. Similarly, we can pivot by gender instead. So we got 2 groups, and inside each group, we got 3 different groups comparison. The third approach to create comparison view is using threshold. Threshold is a visual concept. It doesn't really manipulate the data to create a comparison. Instead, it created the comparison view visually by slicing the line areas into above section and below sections. Let's take a look. What does that mean? So in these same examples, we're using the students have some scores, and we also have time dimensions. In this case, we just removing the group and gender, but instead we're using the time series as the dimensions we're looking into. It records the average score time by time. In this case, let's slice it into a bounded time. So let's say I want to see the weekly view. So this is like basically weekly average values across the timeline. We select it here. I turn it into the line view, and heading into the line, we got the threshold set up here. We can set a new threshold by putting the new values into the middle. In this case, I want to make my threshold at 72 or just 70. To magnify the values a little bit better, I want to reduce the XL. YXL basically low values to bring it up a little bit. By default is 0, 64. As long as it's less than the low value we have, it should have a good view. In this case, we can see this is a line, but the line with a threshold in the middle, so we can clear a very, very clear view about what time ranges the values is below the threshold and what time ranges is above the threshold. In this case, we can also tune the threshold so we can create some comparison view to show clear to the audience what kind of areas they want to focus on to see. The fourth approach is to using highlight. Highlight is basically to leverage some visual tools to help us to highlight some sections or specific elements or items from the chart or from the canvas. So let's look at the bar chart. For example, we have a few pretty high items. I want to highlight them. I can just go ahead to select and just choose highlight them. You can tune the different colors for the rest of the items, or just the opacity. So you can make the items you selected really outstanding. In this case, I'm highlighted these two, and sometimes I want to highlight a section, then an arrow is very, very useful. For example, I want to highlight these sections between these few items. We can easily go to check out the shadow area. So it's basically, it can help us to highlight some sections. The last but not the least approach is to use a comparison chart. In this case, we say pie chart or donut chart is naturally created for comparison. We usually treat a pie or donut as a whole piece 100%, and each key takes one portion, or sometimes we call a slice. By looking at the percentage of each slice taken, we naturally, directly, straightforwardly looking the comparison between those keys. For example, here we switch the keys to one dimension as a group. So we got a street group. Bar chart has some comparisons by the height, but if we switch to pie, we can exactly see the percentage of each group taking the whole piece.